Hey, Steve. Hey, congratulations for the documentary series City So Real.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Hey, not a problem. Hey, so tell me what originated the idea for you to do a five-part documentary series on Chicago.
Uh, for years living here, I've wanted to do a kind of portrait of Chicago because I just am fascinated with this city. I've been making a lot of films about it, but I was looking for the right time to do it. I wanted to pick it at a time when Chicago was at an important juncture. With the mayoral election last year and the Laquan McDonald murder trial last year, it seemed like that was the perfect time to go out and try and do this portrait of the city.
So tell me about your personal connections to Chicago, because obviously, you have to be a Chicagoan to really appreciate a documentary like this. So what is your personal connection?
Well, I wasn't born here. I'm a Virginian, but I've been in the Chicagoland for 35 years. So, and I've made my life here, my career here, and there's so many stories to tell. So, I think of this really as my hometown, not the one I grew up in.
So how did you initially want to approach a documentary and a very ambitious documentary like this? Because there almost 20 different candidates that were entering the mayoral race. I mean, that must have been very, how can you say, perplex, complex
Yeah.
in its own way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think at one time there were 21 candidates for mayor, 14 of which made the ballot. So I knew that we weren't going to try to follow all those candidates. I was intrigued by the fact that there were so many and that there was such an amazing cross section of people running for the office of mayor. I think whoever you are in Chicago, there was probably a candidate for you. And so I was very intrigued with that and wanted to look at the sort of larger political process of Chicago politics through this campaign. But, we identified several candidates that we thought were really interesting that we tended to focus on more. Candidates like Amar Enya, Lori Lightfoot, Paul Vallis, Neil Salas Griffin, who is an amazing person and an amazing subject in the series, even though he, spoiler alert, he comes in last in the election. So, but it doesn't matter because he was a fascinating person. And so, some of the front runner candidates that we approached to try to embed a little bit with were more reluctant to do that because they thought they actually would become mayor and that they didn't want anything embarrassing to have been captured during the election. But it didn't matter. They're still in our film. We showed up at debates. We showed up at press conferences. We showed up at any kind of event that was public for those candidates. And I feel like it is also a revealing portrait of them.
So the candidates that were willingly wanting to participate, were they really that easy to convince? I mean, what was behind the motivations for them to be part of your documentary?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think what I did with every candidate that we approached is I explained the overarching idea of this. Well, it was going to be a film originally, and then it became a series, which was, yes, we're following the mayoral election. That's not all we're doing. This is a portrait of the city and its people. And this is part of that story, but it's not the entire story. And a lot of the candidates who let us in really loved that idea. They really took to that idea that, yes, it's going to be a political film, but it's going to be more than that. And so they were intrigued by it. In fact, Lori Lightfoot was someone we really had to chase, even though, for the longest time, she was a decidedly minor candidate. We really had to chase getting her access, not because of her, but because of her press people at the time. They didn't see any value in her doing this for her campaign, but she personally liked it. And thank God, because we were able to kind of circumvent the press people and get the access that we got to Lori And the fact that she ended up becoming mayor, you know, that really paid off.
So logistically, how did you manage to pull this off? Because you have to really follow at least a half a dozen candidates almost nearly every day.
Yeah, so like I say, you know, most political documentaries, you know, the filmmakers will embed oftentimes with a single candidate, sometimes more than one, but they'll be there every day for the day in, day out, you know, issues of a candidacy and strategies and meetings and going out on the junkets and all that. We did some of that. There were certain candidates like Amara Enya that we spent quite a bit of time with. But that was never our desire, was to give you that kind of view of the politics in Chicago. We really wanted to have it be a much more sweeping view of the whole process. So we spent a lot of time, for instance, at the Board of Elections and the petition process, which was, you know, incredible. And it's a very significant part of episodes 2 and 3, especially in the series. You know, we really wanted to give you the sense of what politics, how it plays out in Chicago versus in an individual campaign. We shot every day, all day. After a while, we did have my son Jackson James was one of the DPs. He would go out and shoot. We had other DPs like Kevin Shaw. So, you know, we did have some multiple crew, you know, in the street some, but not as much as you'd imagine, except on election day. On election day, we had 6 crews so that we could get around to all the candidates that we were following.
Were there any situations where you wish you had access to?
Oh, always. Yeah, I mean, you always, you know, every documentary filmmakers wants more access if they can get it. I mean, I would have loved to have had access to Preckwinkle's campaign and Daley's campaign, you know, to the inner workings of that a little bit. I would have loved to have had it, but that just wasn't going to happen. So we did what we could do. And like I say, we showed up at events. You get a sense of them as candidates, at least to the degree that we're interested in this series. But we were very fortunate. The candidates that let us in were really cooperative. Willie Wilson is another candidate that we spent quite a bit of time with, and he, of course, is quite an entertaining person to follow, as you can imagine, in this race.
I was very fascinated how you managed to use regular Chicagoans throughout your entire documentary. How did you pick out your subjects? You know, like going to the hair salons, barbershops, or restaurants. I mean, how did you basically pick them out and convince them to be part of your documentary, per se?
Yeah, great question. So, like, for instance, I'll take by example the the Sideline Barbershop on the South Side, the Black Barbershop. We went to that barbershop. Our ostensible reason for going to that barbershop that day was to get them to talk a bit about this barber, Harith Augustus, who in the series, when we were filming, he was killed in an altercation with police, right? And it was, for about a week there, it was kind of a very tense issue in Chicago. And I just wanted to know who this guy was. So we went to the barbershop with that in mind, but that's not what the scene's about, as you know. The scene becomes about a very intense conversation between some of the people working in the barbershop and some of the patrons, in particular a postal worker, over issues of privilege within their community. Mm-hmm. And it was quite a conversation that then inspired us to go to the Bridgeport barbershop. Because we were like, you know, Black barbershops are kind of iconic for these kinds of engaged conversations. What goes on in a white barbershop? And so that sent us to that Bridgeport barbershop, in which we got quite a contrasting experience. And that happened a lot. If we were following trick-or-treaters on the Northwest Side on Halloween for the first part of the evening, we shot down to Hyde Park to see what trick-or-treaters were going through in that part of Chicago. And so we were always looking to sort of compare and contrast the experiences of Chicagoans across this great city.
So overall, how many districts of Chicago did you manage to cover? Because it's Chicago's a pretty large city itself.
Yeah, I think there's 70 to 80 identifiable neighborhoods. We didn't get to all of them. I should probably add them up, but between all 5 episodes, in episode 5, we got around to, I think, a dozen new neighborhoods. So we got to a lot of neighborhoods. You know, I don't think there was any part of the city we didn't get to. Obviously, we didn't get to every single neighborhood.
So when did you come up with the decision to add the 5th episode? Obviously, the 5th episode wasn't filmed along with the 4 other
Right.
episodes, and you basically had to, how can you say, crunch it out in just the past few months alone.
Yes. So the 5th episode came about because when the pandemic hit, it really ground to a halt, everything, including the film industry, including sales of films. So, we had had this series at Sundance, we had played it at some other festivals, and suddenly everything just stopped. And so while we were waiting for all of that to hopefully subside, the pandemic, of course, hit. And then when George Floyd hit, it made it clear to us that the world had changed enough, and Chicago had changed enough in the year since we had wrapped shooting, that we needed to take stock of where Chicago is today. And so that's what led us to the 5th episode, and to make it as current as possible. I didn't want people to watch the first 4 episodes and go, wow, that's the distant past now, even though it's not, but it feels like the distant past before COVID, before masks, before all of this.
So how was it filming during COVID? Because a lot of film productions had difficulties trying to gather productions just to film during a pandemic, but you managed to pull it off seamlessly.
Thank you. Yeah, it was not easy. At first, I did interviews via the Zoom and internet, because the shelter-in-place order was, and we took that very seriously, and so we didn't venture out hardly at all. But as things loosened up a little bit, and then when George Floyd hit, we realized that we needed to be out in the streets and really capture what was going on, and so we did, and we took the safety precautions that we could take. We always wore masks, we wore gloves, we sanitized frequently during the day. We maintained distance. But as you see in episode 5, if you've seen it, there's quite a wide range of compliance from people when it comes to this pandemic. Some people are wearing masks, some people are not, some people have the mask down here. So it was vitally important that we be as careful as we could ourselves, for our own sake, but also for the sake of those folks, because we were traveling around the city. We didn't want to be carriers and super spreaders.
Absolutely. One of the things that I was fascinated that you actually covered was the George Floyd's protests. Was your crew in any danger, or did you guys basically made extreme precautions not to get in the midst of things?
Yeah, no, I don't think there was any real danger. Some of that footage you see there is captured by my son, Jackson, when things got heated, and by a friend of his, 2 friends of his, actually, who were out. So I myself had no interest in being in the midst of that bedlam. And I didn't really want my son to be in the midst of it either. In fact, I told him to avoid it, but he's young, and he went and shot a protest that, gets out of hand when the cops decide to start arresting people. And he just kind of, he got himself right in the middle of it. But I think he'd have to tell you if he ever felt really in any kind of danger. I don't think so. For the most part, we were very careful about all that, and most of the protests we follow in the series in episode 5 was peaceful. It was people engaged in peaceful protests, which is what most of the protests was. So there was no real danger there.
Although by episode 5, the mayoral race is decided with Lori Lightfoot, which I understand why you followed up with her. But why did you follow up with some of the former mayoral candidates too, even though the race is over?
Well, when we decided to do episode 5, we thought, if we just go out and film, kind of randomly in the streets, we'll get interesting stuff, which we did. But we also felt like for people who had watched the series and would come to episode 5, that they would have some investment in some of the people that they've met along the way, and want to know what they were up to. So Amara and Neil, for example, were 2 people that you get to know quite well in the first 4 episodes. And it's great to sort of check back in with them and see what they're doing now, post running for mayor. And of course, no surprise, they're actively engaged in trying to do good work in the city. And it was nice to be able to show that. We also check back in, with Tim Tutton, the owner of the Hideout Bar, who's quite a firebrand. We also check back in with the folks at Daly's Restaurant on 63rd and Cottage Grove. Places that we went in the first 4 episodes that I think were memorable, at least for us as filmmakers, and hopefully for you as a viewer, and that you would be interested to check in with them and see how they were doing.
Overall, how much footage did you manage to accumulate? Because it was a lot of documentary for 5+ hours. So I can imagine you basically collected maybe over 100 hours of footage.
Oh yeah, no, well over 400 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, well over 400. Yeah, we shoot a lot. That's how it goes from supposed to be a standalone film to a docuseries, because there was just so much that happened, and we just had to keep getting it, keep going after it.
So that editing process must have been an ordeal for you then.
It was. I think our first cut was 12 hours. And then we decided, okay, we have to really put the hammer to it. And so we did. And I had a great editing partner in David Simpson, who has worked with me a lot over the years. And, he's an extraordinary editor, and, we went at it.
Excellent. Well, let me start wrapping things up with you. When people watch your 5-part documentary, what is the one most important lesson that you hope that people would take out of this?
Well, it's hard to distill it to one lesson. But I would say that I want people to look at this series and both get a kind of unique portrait of a very special and unique city, Chicago, that feels real and feels lived in and feels authentic. At the same time, I want people, especially people who aren't from Chicago, I want them to watch the series and reflect on how Chicago represents America, and that what goes on here is what's going on in their hometowns and all across America. The same issues of race, of police conduct, of gentrification, of socioeconomic inequities. All of these things are American issues, and I hope that people will. This series will give them cause to reflect on their own situations as well.
Absolutely. Hey, Steve, thank you very much. As a person who lived in Joliet, Illinois from 75 to 83, I really appreciate it, especially covering the
hat. Yes,
covering the South Side for myself. So, hey, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the interview. Enjoyed it.
Not a problem. Bye now.
Bye-bye.